Look at that, right on time, 9 o'clock, and big show, really big show. Election 2025, obviously in the big spotlight here. Canadian majority oppose border benefits. Another Liberal picks party over family, and pigs can fly. All that and more on the really big show. I'm Jim Check with Kelowna Now. A little socked in here in Kelowna. Traffic flowing nicely though, but definitely socked in here in Kelowna. How's it looking in Ottawa there?
It's gloomy. It's like a couple of degrees right now and very, very cloudy and unpleasant looking, I'm sorry to say.
As the nation turns to Ottawa to see who leads this nation for the next 4 years, Ian Burns in the spotlight, our managing editor with Kelowna Now, still doesn't know what's the deal with his car though. No dealio yet, eh?
Yeah, no deal on that, and none of the political parties are offering a solution to my broken car. So I don't know what to do about that either.
Yeah. Well, we kick things off with well, maybe when you came across the border, you should have done it a different way instead of the legal way, because the benefits. 56% of Canadians oppose border benefits. That's a Holly Doan's Blacklock story. A majority of Canadians say illegal immigrants and refugee claimants receive too many federal benefits, according to an internal research by the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. 41% there's too much attention focused on the rights of newcomers. 56% indicated refugees and asylum seekers receive way too many benefits. And there you go.
Well, if this is happening across the whole Western world, we're used to talking about this in the either the European or the American context, aren't we? Of people that sneak over the border and present themselves to they don't well I say sneak over the border, they don't really sneak, do they sort of present themselves to a border guard, and then they say, look, I'm from this country, wherever it is in the world, I'm being persecuted for this reason, sexuality, politics, whatever it is, and I need to be granted asylum and protected because my life is at risk. Then the border guard is obligated, there's a protocol in place. Border Guard is then obligated to move them on to kind of immigration officials who will arrange a court date so that they can have a hearing to find out whether they can in fact claim asylum. And then in the meantime, they need somewhere to live, and they need, because they can't work, it's illegal for them to work, so they also need to be sustained somehow. And this can go on because of backlogs, because the borders are just like, they cannot handle the numbers of people that cross over and attempt this. So there's a huge backlog in the courts. So they just end up really kind of living on the taxpayer's dime in limbo as they just wait. And for a lot of people in a lot of countries around the world, that's not a particularly disagreeable life. They're being paid for to just wait, and then they usually have a pretty reasonably high success rate as well when they finally do see a judge. But yeah, like I say, we're used to seeing that in the European and American context, but it is also happening a lot in Canada. And especially, I think, and it says it in this study, doesn't it, when it comes, that it's a strain, the economic strain, that's what it says. I mean, that's particularly true, isn't it, when we've had a housing crisis for many years. And these people must be housed somewhere because the law says so. The law says that they become a ward of the state. So the state has to give them somewhere to live and obviously food to eat and medicine and so on. These are all the things that Canadians are struggling with, who've been here for all their lives and 10 generations in history or something like that. So quite obviously they're not particularly happy about that, are they? Particularly when the people who come over aren't necessarily obviously fleeing for their lives. It's not like they're a Jewish refugee in 1943 or something like that that's managed to escape a death camp and said, like, please save me and rescue me. It's not really like that. They come from countries like Bangladesh and, like middle income countries that are somewhat dysfunctional, but it's not quite the same thing as, the Holocaust.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Sean Fraser, who we've interviewed before. He was also the head of the Immigration Services and also the head of housing. And 54% of Canadians said accepting refugees puts way too much pressure on the public services in Canada. And we've seen that here in Canada. The rent pressures and then the healthcare, definitely one of the things. We talked about that story yesterday where a young lady there has to wait just a crazy amount of time to get an MRI for a suspected brain tumor.
And for some reason, there's more sensitivity about these people who've just randomly turned up at the border and said, I want to live here. There's more sensitivity about them being homeless or denied medical care or what have you, it seems to me at least, than Canadian citizens. And that's the same in the British context. In Britain, all the dysfunctions that we discuss in Canadian society also exist in the United Kingdom. And they also have people that come across the English Channel on those little dinghies, and it seems that there's a lot of sensitivity about making sure that they get a dentist, making sure that they get healthcare and good, like 3 meals a day and all this kind of thing. And it really does seem to me, and many people in that country and in Canada, that there's more interest and more sensitivity about these people than the native population that is also struggling.
You know what it reminds me of? Two things: cell phone companies and banks, where they don't care about the current customers, neither one of them, and they do care about getting new customers. They just bend over backwards to get a new customer, but once you're a customer, they could care less about you. Then you see,
Yeah, banks are the same, aren't they, as well?
That's what I'm saying. Banks and cell phone companies, once you're a customer, like no deals for you, right? And I remember that even with one of the largest Canadian telecom dealers, when landlines were a thing, right? Like you couldn't get a deal on a landline unless you were about to cancel it and go to a competition. Then all of a sudden the deals came out, but they sure didn't look after their customers. And I could say the same thing. It looks like, for the most part, Canadians come second, but and it's just, young people have become disenfranchised with the way that it is here. Like most of them don't think they can ever afford a home.
Yeah, but I must say, I don't mean to give the impression that these people are living a life of luxury or something like that. In many cases, they're not, and their prospect of owning a home is also very low, if not lower than for native Canadians. But I think the point is that they are still granted shelter, food, medical care, and so on. And those are the things that there are. Pierre Poilievre talks about this all the time, doesn't he? How there's like 35-year-olds living in their parents' basements and things like that. It's like that's the context in which you have to look at it, I think. And then that also, that what you mentioned about that woman that claims that she has to wait 18 months for a brain scan and things like that. It's very important, isn't it, to look at that. And it's not necessarily the case that these refugees are being given the silver spoon or anything like that, but it's just more the fact that the natives of this country aren't even being granted that sort of minimum level of services. So it sort of makes it very difficult for the majority of the population to swallow something like this.
And then you and I talked about this before we went on the air. I think it was yesterday, actually. Just a warning to Canadians to really be cautious on where you're getting your news from the next 28 so days until the April 28th election. Because there is going to be a lot of bias out there. A lot of media outlets are definitely scared for their lives because one promises to fund them, double their funding, and the other one promises to cut it. So, and then there's misinformation out there too, saying that the Conservatives would get rid of the CBC. They're not saying that. They're just saying they would defund the CBC, the English language speaking one. There's a difference between getting rid of them and then just taking away the funding from the English speaking ones. And then all the benefits that go to select media too, and a couple of schemes that the Liberals have kind of laid out, and then the crippling of the others with Bill C-18.
Yeah, and again, to refer to Holly Dawn, our favorite person, it seems, who referred to it, or at least her publication, Blacklock's, referred to it as converting the mainstream media outlets in Canada into like de facto crown corporations. I mean, when you put it in such stark language as that, I think it should like wake you up a bit. It should give your head a shake to think that we are kind of approaching a situation where de facto, so like in reality, if not in law, but in practice, the likes of CTV and all the rest of them are kind of like arm's length bodies of the federal government. That's not cool, is it? I mean,
well,
nuts.
I guess if that's what you want, where the government controls the media and no longer has the media holding them accountable, then that's what you want. But in any real democracy, that would be a bad thing.
You would think, yeah, you'd think there'd be consensus on that, but unfortunately, the people that might help us have a national conversation about this subject they all have a dog in the race. They all want the money to keep flowing, so they don't want to talk about it because they know that the Canadian taxpayer, will not be pleased if they're made aware of the details of their funding arrangement.
Well, you can rest assured, Ian and I get zero funding. Kelowna now gets zero funding from the government, any government actually. And so we are free to say what we want to say, even if some people don't like it.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure the aforementioned media outlets don't like it. And they certainly wouldn't like it if it was to get out there and break through into the mainstream as a point of discussion.
Well, that's where our readers and viewers can help and spread the message, right? So that our message can get out to a larger audience, and you can like and subscribe and share, and that would be greatly appreciated because there is very few independent media outlets left in Canada, and that's 3 to die here just in May here in the Lower Mainland, choked off again by Bill C-18. Let's get to the election 2025. We're going to kind of like spruce this up tomorrow. We're going to have some big fancy graphics and all that kind of stuff. We're going to try and compete with the big boys with our budget of almost, well, compared to their budgets, right? Like, just think if we had even like a small fraction of their $1.44 billion, right? The CBC gets and all the money that, the rest of them get through funding. Pierre Poilievre out. Again, one-ups Mark Carney. Mark Carney took his idea and where he said there's no GST on new home builds for first-time home buyers. He just said, well, let's do 1.3 million, same like he did with the taxes. So he one-upped them once again. So Poilievre will axe the tax on new homes under 1.3 million, saving homeowners up to $65,000 on the purchase of an average home in our big cities and sparking 36 new homes built every year. So there you go.
Yeah, it's becoming like an auction now, isn't it? And
Yeah.
they're bidding. But he
We got to
said
get.
he was in the kind of Toronto area this morning, and he said at a press conference that when he tried to explain this policy, he just said, since I announced this policy, which wasn't very long ago at all, it's only a few months ago, but he said, since I announced it, house prices have again increased, and therefore I have to increase this policy. I mean, that's a little bit cheeky, I would say, possibly a little bit disingenuous of him to claim because it's not really true. But it does sort of recognize the reality, particularly in Toronto, of just how expensive a house is. I mean, people that aren't familiar with Toronto might not be aware of it, but like a completely bog standard crap house, like just I mean, maybe it's not fair to say crap, but like a totally ordinary house that, nothing to tell anybody about, nothing to write home about. In Toronto, if you want to live in a nice area, is like minimum $2 million. That's like, that is how degraded and broken that housing market is. So $1 million in that context wasn't going to go that far. So 1.3, I guess, helps a little bit more. And obviously Toronto's packed full of people and therefore votes. So he wants their votes.
There you go. And then speaking about disingenuous, Mark Carney coming out. He's got a nice fancy bus there, right? He says this is a Holly Dones Blacklock story as well. We thank Holly Dones for letting us do these stories. They do great work. Again, you can go to Blacklock so you can subscribe. $314 a year. She also takes zero money from the feds so that she can keep her independence. There you go. Very few of them out there. Mark Carney yesterday said he has over-complied with ethics requirements, but again refused to disclose of investments. Carney confirmed he held stock in 2 multinational corporations headquartered abroad, New York. He just moved it there, but would not sell his holdings. And he says, I've complied with all aspects, and he's over-complied, and I'm proud that we have it. And, yeah, I don't know. Like, he says, I've divested of all my assets with the exception of cash and personal real estate, a house and a cottage, into a blind trust, as is the route. It's a blind trust. The issue that I would have is that climate change is still one of his biggest agendas, and Brookfield Asset Management, very involved in that. So are you going to drive policy based on to the benefit of Brookfield Asset Management? I think the only way to do this is to get any kind of trust is to disclose what you own and how Brookfield Asset Management benefits from this. And the other thing I would say is if you're telling everybody that you're in a fight with the Americans, then move Brookfield Asset Management's headquarters back to Canada.
Yeah, well, I don't think he would have the power to do that, but he could certainly call for that to happen, couldn't he? He could say, I implore you, Brookfield, to do this and bring it back to Canada. But then obviously, I mean, for very obvious reasons, he wouldn't want to do that because he literally only just signed off on them going to New York. So it would look very opportunistic.
He not only signed off on them going to New York, he recommended that all directors vote for the move to New York.
Yeah. And obviously, we're in a trade war with the United States, and yet his unknown personal fortune, we have no idea how much it is, but this mysterious pile of money, the majority of it is in the United States. We must conclude that is invested in the United States securities, is in the stocks in the United States. So he has a house and a cottage, he says, but that's not even in the trust. So that's not something that we're talking about here. And cash. I mean, the cash though as well, is the cash in US dollars, as is often the case for savers and investors. They often keep US dollars, don't they? So there's all kinds of questions about his financial how should we describe it? His financial connection to the United States and his reliance on the United States for his own personal finances. That's an important question to ask when he tells us every single day that we are basically in a war with the United States.
Yeah, I believe all he does is like you talk about Stickler. I think the only he's trying to do is stick handle, and we can talk about his little hockey analogy later. But like, it seems like a lot of stick handling, and this is an issue that I don't believe is going to go away until he comes clean on it. And it doesn't look like he wants to come clean because obviously he doesn't want to share.
Oh, absolutely. In politics, the world of politics, you know that when something's being fought, as this is, they talk about political capital, don't they? And how you only have so much and you have to spend it wisely. He is spending political capital here at quite a fast rate. So for him to be spending all this political capital on a defense of his personal assets tells you that he thinks it's really important that it does not get out there.
Well, I
So I
think
mean, that's
yeah.
just it seems to me, yeah, he's worried. He's worried that it should be released, and that's all the more reason for us to know what's in there, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe that he would think that it must be damning if it was disclosed. Otherwise, he would just release it. It would make sense to release it.
It could also be the fact that he's been working in the money business, we might as well call it, in the world of finance for many, many years, his entire career. It's possible that his personal fortune will surprise people, like the size of it. It might be really, really huge. And I think probably he doesn't want that to be in the public domain either. He doesn't want the NDP, for one, to be able to say, like, look at this guy who's worth like $80 million or more or whatever the hell it is. Like he would not want that to be out there because especially during like a cost of living crisis and all the rest of it, that's just the way it is. It doesn't swing with voters. It doesn't go down well to be extremely rich and trying to rule over Canadians when lots of people are feeling the pinch right now.
Rich and arrogant, the two things that even if you are rich, coming across as arrogant doesn't really help either.
Yeah, well, indeed, it would add to that it would add to that impression that a lot of people have of him as being a little bit aloof, maybe, and a bit of a kind of elitist, as he's been accused of being.
Let's play this clip here from Mark Carney.
Waiting to talk to the Prime Minister of whoever wins this election?
Well, that's an interpretation, but I think it's a reasonable interpretation. I'm available for a call, but, we're going to talk on our terms.
Yeah, so there's a lot of people making a lot of noise about that, saying that apparently Trump is refusing to speak to anybody until we have an election and determine that.
It's a very interesting approach to the United States, isn't it? I mean, yeah, I would say that it's almost certainly because of the election. It's a political maneuver, isn't it? But I don't know how wise it is to not have any kind of personal rapport, any kind of
I would say that
any kind of relationship with the president of the United States.
I would say that the people in the background, like the bureaucrats, should be working together with the American bureaucrats. Maybe they don't have to have the leaders, because it makes sense if you're not sure who is going to be the leader. You can't make a deal and then you throw the deal away. But the bureaucrats should be working nonstop and trying to get something done, and Canada should be working nonstop and trying to get other deals. We got a clip here from Danielle Smith here, though.
Friends, this is not an election that we can sit on the sidelines for. That is why I hope all of you here today are able to find the time to support our federal Conservative friends during their upcoming election campaign, and call all your friends and family across the country and ask them to do the same. We cannot lose this election. There is just too much at stake.
There you go. That's the first province I've seen come out in support of a party. So that is from Danielle Smith, supporting the Conservatives. I'm sure we're going to see something from David Eby here. And any guess where he's going to go?
Well, it is open question, really, isn't it? But I mean, you would expect he'd go for his friend Jagmeet Singh. But it's interesting that I think this is the most interesting thing about this. It's no surprise that Danielle Smith is pro-conservative. I mean, anybody with even a loose sort of knowledge of Alberta politics knows that that's obvious, isn't it? She's going to do that because the Conservatives are more consistently pro natural resources than the Liberals. So she considers that to be a question of survival, not just for Alberta, but also for Canada. So that's a no-brainer. Obvious she was going to do that. But what is interesting is to contrast that with Doug Ford, who hasn't made a peep in favor of his supposed Conservative brother in the form of Pierre Poilievre. He's not saying anything, and in fact, if the rumors are true and to be believed, they actually really, really dislike each other quite profoundly and don't speak to each other. So that's an intriguing one.
Chrystia Freeland said she had dinner with him, so there you go.
Yeah, he likes Chrystia, and he likes Carney as well. Doug, that is, but not so much Poilievre.
Rommel, can I ask you to people have asked to leave those comments up, like the notes up, at least for like 10 seconds so people can read them, I guess, if we're going to put them up, because they just flash up there. So there you go. We'll leave your comments up. So if you're commenting and it's not full of like bad words and stuff, maybe it'll show up on our screen. Like I said, we try to communicate with our viewers and try to share as we move along. And sometimes we'll even talk about some of the comments that flash up on the screen. And then we have the bloc leader speaking to reporters. And this is more about, like this French debate that Mark Carney at first said he would do. And then he changed his mind after his party said, oh, no, you're not doing it. So here you go.
Is supposed to be strong enough to face Donald Trump, which is one of the biggest threats on democracy and freedom for a long time. I will face the guy. And then we say, hey, come in Quebec and discuss with us because you want us to vote for you. Oh, I won't go. And I have the perfect pretext. I say, us, the Liberal Party of Canada, we do not have $75,000. We're so poor. Yeah, I do believe that. So I'm saying to him, hey, let's come and face the music. Officially.
There you go. And then we have a comment from Pierre Poilievre when, he says he doesn't have the money. So there you go. Ahead, play this by Pierre Poilievre.
Pay Mr. Carney amendment that will build the homes. I'll even pay Mr. Carney's fee so that he can show up. We'll take that excuse away from him. Conservatives will even pay the fee to bring him out if he's not afraid. And by the way, if he is afraid.
There you go. So you have Blanchette saying, it seems like a lame excuse. And Poilievre saying, well, if that's the excuse, we'll even foot the bill.
And then he said, if you continue that video there, he says after that, we'll also make sure that Elizabeth May, the leader of the Green Party, is invited as well, because that was the excuse that Mark Carney went with today. He said, "Oh, we
Yeah.
couldn't possibly do it because the Green Party's not represented."
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I just feel, look, this is one of those situations where everybody that is not partisan, everybody that's even like makes even a little bit of an attempt to be neutral on this matter, recognizes what's happening. Mark Carney doesn't speak French very well. And well, to be honest, he does actually speak French all right, and he's got very good comprehension. But he doesn't speak it as well as Pierre Poilievre, let's say, and he's not as fast on his feet in French. Or he's not really fast on his feet in any language, but in the political sense. But he's concerned that this would present him in a bad light in Quebec, in a kind of free flowing, like not a particularly regulated debate where you can chat a bit more freely. He's worried that that will make him look worse. And as is the classic sort of political calculus has gone on. Will this benefit me or will it be a negative? And they've decided for obvious reasons that it'll be a negative. So they're not going to do it. And now they're thinking of stupid excuses. But everybody that's neutral realizes it's a stupid excuse. Everybody on the opposition or that supports the opposition realizes that it's a stupid excuse. So it's almost like, who's this for? I guess it's for the Liberals. It's for the Liberals that, are very committed to that party. And they'll just swallow that because they have to remain intellectually consistent. So it just seems this is the kind of thing that makes politics or gives politics a bad reputation. It's people who are very intelligent and powerful behaving as though the majority of the population is extremely stupid and gullible.
Yeah, and it's odd too because like here the Liberals are now worried that so like a fringe party is not going to get representation. But then when Ruby Dalla and Chandra, they said they were just nuisances and couldn't speak the language properly, so they shouldn't be allowed to have airtime or be a part of a debate. Seems like to be a bit of a conflict there, no?
When you're talking about matters of power, and you talk about, so in other words, politics, and trying to climb up that slimy pole to become the Prime Minister of Canada, I would say consistency, principles, all of that. Don't waste your time even looking for that because you're not going to find it. They do what they need to do in the moment to sort of get past that hurdle of the day as they try and continue up that pole to try and become the Prime Minister. And principles just don't even come into it really. So yeah, obviously that's that's one example of how they're not very principled in this business of politics.
And then they go, the poly markets just flipped again because the Conservatives had this huge commanding lead, and then Carney took that lead, and now I think it was last night, they kind of flipped back in some areas. The polls are starting to reflect a little bit of a change there.
That probably favors Mark Carney though, doesn't it? Overall, I would say, because if they're that tight, like Poilievre doesn't have the advantage of another party that will almost certainly back him up. There is no other kind of conservative party, but there are two liberal parties, well, and the Green Party, I guess. So there are three liberal parties. So unless Poilievre has a plan to do a deal with the Bloc or something like that, which could happen, I guess. But
yep, that'd be the only realistic.
It's not great news for Poilievre, I don't think.
That'd be the only realistic alliance for the Conservatives with the Bloc, and it'd be interesting to see if the Bloc takes back some of the seats that they lost to the Liberals as well. So
apparently, according to the polls, again, we don't really know for sure, but the polls seem to suggest that, again, sort of contrary to what you might think, that the Quebecois are quite keen on Mark Carney. So despite his, lack of complete fluency in French and all the rest of it, but I don't know, it remains a mystery to me what the Quebecois do and why they do it.
And then so Mark Carney was at the Irving Shipbuilding plant there in Halifax, and telling you that he's now going to invest in the military, and says it was Harper that wrecked the military.
Well, he also said something very, very cheeky, and I'm going to have to say it's a little bit disingenuous. He said that the Liberal Party in the last 10 years has more than doubled defense spending. I mean, this is a former governor of the Bank of England, former governor of the Bank of Canada, talking about doubling spending. he's not saying that as a proportion of GDP, because that's false. It's actually gone up and down. It's pretty much the same, if not less than it was in the Harper years. He's talking about just in cash terms, isn't he? And obviously, as he knows very well, as a financial wizard, there's been something called inflation over those last 10 years, which renders that claim a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah, always playing with the numbers, right? Just playing with the numbers. And that's the liberals are telling us for the past 10 years, the economy is great. And that it's just a vibe. And Chrystia Freeland still running. Like, she was the one that said it's just a vibe session. No such thing as a recession, just a vibe.
Yeah, but I just to linger on that for a second, the audacity of that. I mean, Justin Trudeau was accused all the time of saying, of sort of being a little bit dishonest and a little bit sort of tricksy with numbers and with claims. Justin Trudeau, as he was being battered relentlessly by the opposition and the media for defense spending, he never once, to my recollection, made that claim. He never once said we've more than doubled spending, because it seems like that didn't even pass the Trudeau sniff test. He thought, nah, I can't get away with that. That's just inflation. That's stupid. But here's Mark Carney. I just find that funny.
If you look at the hard realities of our nation's military, we're under 55,000. We're supposed to be at 76, 77,000. So we can't even get people to sign up for the military. And they have unspent money for people not signing up. They pay them abysmally. And we have no nuclear icebreakers. We have no nuclear submarines. We have no nuclear warships. And that's what we need to protect our north. And I think we have 40-year-old Air Force jets that are mostly not even in service. I think there's about 60 might be in service or less, that people say. And then we have 4 submarines we brought from your old nation there. We bought them at a garage sale from the UK, and 2 of them even started on fire as we were sailing them back to Canada. So we have 4 conventional submarines. Diesel, I guess that doesn't really work with climate change, right? We have 4 diesel submarines. And like, we don't really have a Navy that could, cause much of a concern to anybody. And, they're talking about even scrapping, which Trudeau was supposed to buy the I think Harper had that in there. They was going to buy the F-35s. When Trudeau got in there, he said absolutely not, delayed it in 2015. And in 2023, finally committed to buying the F-35s. And now it sounds like Carney and the boys are perhaps going to delay that as well, or look at different alternatives. And you can't just one day decide that you're going to buy jet fighters and then have them the next day. They don't have them unless you're buying from the UK's used garage sale. That's the only way we're going to get something. And the UK may have a garage sale again one day. Maybe they're going to sell us some of those.
Be very happy to make some of their money back from Mark Carney after his time as Bank of England governor.
Maybe they're going to sell us the famed Harriers that won the Falkland War. How long ago was that war?
1982.
There you go.
43 years ago.
Those are probably the right age for us to be buying then, right?
Yeah, that seems to be Canada's traditional market, doesn't it? But I would say one sort of serious point there. You're talking about the Navy being inadequate for various things. It's inadequate, I would say. The most important thing to sort of get into people's minds. It's inadequate for claiming sovereignty over the land that is on the map. When you look at Canada on a map, the Navy doesn't even serve the purpose of claiming that land as Canadian. I mean, that's the kind of disaster that we face, especially now that sovereignty is Mark Carney's favorite word. Look at the South China Sea, just as an example. Look at the South China Sea or the Himalayas, but between China and India. Like, land and sovereignty is kind of an open question if somebody's willing to challenge you. And that's what the Chinese have done in the South China Sea. They've got a load of ships around there. They dump sand into the shallow sea so that they can create these mini islands, and then they sort of say that that's their territory. They're present. That's how they claim sovereignty, the Chinese. And then the Americans say, no, actually, this is neutral territory, and they assert that by sailing carrier groups through the South China Sea. So we live in a world where you can't just like draw lines on a map and say that's my sovereignty. You have to back that up. You have to physically be present and be there. And Canada's Navy is in absolutely no position whatsoever to claim the sovereignty of the North.
I read Mark Carney's press release on what he's going to invest in the military, and I did not see the word nuclear anywhere. And if you want to be serious in your military, that word needs to be in there somewhere. In the ships, especially the icebreaker, something with power, submarine that can stay under for extended periods of time. And we have Brett here, our regular visitor, said that he did 8 years in combat zones. So you know what I mean, like. The underinvestment in our military is just shameful. And again, you and I have talked about this many, many times, how they pay a bureaucrat in Ottawa makes, sometimes like 3 times the amount that somebody you're asking to go lay in a ditch and actually not only put their life at risk, but actually to kill a stranger because of an order.
Yeah, totally. And it's not like the bureaucrat in Ottawa who's like the assistant deputy regional manager for Inuit communications or something like that. It's not like they're just getting a little bit more money than the guy out there with a rifle in a ditch. In many cases, they're getting like 3 or 4 times the salary. It's like a huge, huge difference.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not really that can't go on, can it? If we're actually serious and we need a military in this country now, and we need to take it seriously, then that cannot continue. It's just impossible.
And then we did the story recently where on December, the Department of Defense office employees are supposed to come into work 3 days a week. And I think it was less than 30% of them actually showed up for work. Meantime, the soldier that makes like 1/3 of what they make is expected to lay in ditches, not in the comfort of their home collecting their paycheck with their jammies on. Like sipping on hot chocolate and watching Netflix.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say obviously, and you know some public servants personally, don't you? Like as your friends, like they do work. Obviously, a lot of them work very hard and they're very useful. But there is also a certain amount of cheekiness and graft, isn't there? But I suppose the point that we're making, in case anybody takes it the wrong way and gets upset, is. Yeah, great. Public servants, we need you within reason. We need you to do what you do to keep the state going and keep all the records and all the rest of it. But I don't necessarily think that you deserve 3 or 4 times the salary of the guy that goes out and kills people and dies to protect this country. I think it should be precisely the opposite. He should get, or she should get, 3 or 4 times the salary of the bureaucrat. And I feel like that is an obvious moral observation. I feel like that's like natural or something.
So if I was running for prime minister, I would give to kind of reflect on Justin Trudeau's 420 rule, where he legalized pot for everybody. The 420 I would run. If you serve 4 years in the military, you get 4 years of education in any university you choose, fully paid for. And if you serve 20 years, you never have to work a day in your life, and you get the same pension that the MPs get.
That would be fair, wouldn't it? That would be justice, I think.
There's the 420 that Canada should have, not the 420 we currently have, where Sir Elton John, one of the a knighted musician from England, said that legalizing pot was one of the biggest mistakes Canada's ever made.
Yeah, big Elton, big intervention from Elton, that, isn't it?
Yeah, so let's campaign for 420, the real 420.
Let's give Elton a ring.
Give Elton the ring, yeah.
Reggie Dwight. Let's see if he can get involved.
Maybe he can come out kind of like the Mike Myers. And we're going to talk about Mike Myers again later here. But hey, we interviewed Sean Fraser when he was the housing minister. And I pitched to him at the time, because we're always, one thing about this news program, we're always pitching good ideas. And we pitched to him at the time. You can go back and watch the interview. Pitched hard to him because I even complimented him. I said, you guys did a good job with GST removal on rentals, and we've seen a lot of rentals here built in Kelowna. Why not remove the GST off of homes? And he said, at the time they didn't really have the money or the budget, and it's not something they're looking at right now. But I guess, and I said, well, Pierre Poilievre is pushing it, and it seems like a really good plan. You guys should adopt it. And here we go. And they've adopted it, and then but the big thing with Sean Fraser is he said he was not running when it looked bad for the Liberals because he wanted to spend time with family. in our headline there. Now he says family comes second because he's back in the game. When we talked about this yesterday, he said how many other Liberals are going to come back in the game. The one that we haven't heard from yet is Pascal St-Onge. Is somebody running in her district, or is we going to hear from her in the next little while that she's back in the game?
Well, somebody was running in Sean Fraser's riding, and it didn't stop this happening. I mean, you take a back seat when the big boys tell you to sit down, don't you?
So
But I would
another.
say Sean Fraser, like, I think you would probably agree with me that he does come across like a really decent chap. He seems like
Yeah.
a fairly nice dude, and he also had the cojones to do an interview with us, which
Yeah.
I cannot say for basically all of his colleagues. But he sat down, and it was like he was in Ottawa, wasn't he? And it was like dark in Ottawa because of the time difference, and he clearly like stayed behind and he was working, and he chosen to have a chat with us. So, you know, all credit to him that he took his sort of job seriously enough to have that conversation with us. And, you know, he gets a lot of, he comes under a lot of attacks from Pierre Poilievre in particular. But I think that's more of a compliment than anything, because I think he is, of all the Trudeau ministers, I think they looked at him as like a sort of their future, really, because he's quite young and quite a
Yeah.
good communicator. I think they thought that they could have him for in the long run. But this is what he's done here is quite ridiculous, isn't it? He should have been honest, or he should be honest. He hasn't yet actually come out and explained his decision making, but he should be honest and transparent and say, look, I thought I was going to lose because everything was in the garbage with Trudeau, but now it looks like we might win, so I'm back. Kind of thing. Like, just be honest. Like, that's why he's doing it.
Yeah, to be fair to him too, is in that interview with him, you know, we weren't that easy on him, but he was definitely, he can articulate a point very well, and he seems like a very intelligent. He's a lawyer, and he speaks well, and he doesn't seem to gaslight as much as some of the other ones out there. So
Yeah, but I just think, like, a politician should speak to everybody and should be really you know, really available and really open to conversations with all kinds of people, and he passed that test. And I just think that by itself, really, take away all of his other anything else you want to talk about related to this chap, that alone is like, you know, well done kind of thing. Because we've had a lot of conversations, like, people listening to this who aren't in the world of journalism wouldn't know, but we try very hard to speak to all sorts of people,
yeah.
and some of them will string us along. You know, they'll sometimes for ages and ages, weeks, and then or months even, and then sort of say no or just not reply. Like, we've been trying to speak to Jagmeet Singh for God knows how long, and that just kind of went dry, didn't it? They just stopped responding to our emails. It's like, it's very easy not to speak to an independent media outlet, as a politician, put it that way, and he did. So, you know, credit where it's due.
There you go. CSIS alleges Indian organizations support for Poilievre's 2022 Conservative leadership bid. So now they're trying to drag this out here. So there you go.
Yeah, it's funny because we were chatting about this briefly earlier, aren't we? It seems like now in the debate, in the public conversation about this, it's like there are two teams. You got the Indian government, apparently, that wants the Tories to win, and then you got the Chinese government, allegedly, that wants the Liberals to win. And that's certainly what the leader of the bloc, Yves-François Blanchet, that's what he just said earlier. He said he believes, he doesn't know anything about this India thing, but he believes it. I don't know why he said that, but he said, I tend to believe that you know, the Indians interfered in the Tory leadership race. But then he said the Liberals, in his words, are very close to Beijing. So, I mean, we are in this odd situation, aren't we, where the Liberals for a long time now have been accused of being a little bit too friendly with the Chinese. And then there's also been accusations for a long time that the Indian community in Canada is interested in backing the Conservatives because of what is effectively like a kind of conflict, like a war that's going on between the Liberal Party and the Indian government. They really despise each other. So, you know, it makes sense that these countries would push their own objectives, but it's just a little bit sad that we have to see this, you know, this attempt to manipulate our elections.
And I think you know, they're putting it out there that Mark Carney has some actual ties with China and even taking loans for the company from China. So there's some information out there on that as well that I'm sure it'll get asked a lot in the next few days, and see where that all
Yep.
kind of See
I
where
would
that all
also say,
shakes
just
out.
last word as well, on how to kind of like read the news. And I don't mean like read the sentences in front of your eyes, but to think, why has this story come out now? This is a what the Globe and Mail calls a highly placed source, unnamed, of course, anonymous source, that's come and released this information about something that happened in 2022. Why, on the third day of the federal election campaign, has this information been granted to the Globe and Mail? You know, you should be able to make your own conclusions about that. It's clear. Ironically, this is election interference from somebody that works for the federal government that wants to influence the election in favor of the Liberal Party. So if you're wondering, you know, put two and two together, and usually whatever you think in your gut will be the right answer. And that's certainly what I think is happening here. This happens in every election, in every part of the world. These people come and crawl out of the nooks and crannies of the state, and they reveal these secrets to a newspaper. And Bob's your uncle. There's a negative story about the Conservatives.
Yeah, and then we didn't put this story in, but I did put it on my LinkedIn. There was a reporter that framed a question to the elections committee and saying that, you know, like, what are we going to do about, and I can't remember the exact framing on my LinkedIn, what are we going to do about election interference by Elon Musk and what he's doing in his endorsement of Pierre Poilievre? And they, you know, the way she framed the question, and they basically said it's not election interference. He's entitled to his opinion to voice it. And but you know, it seems odd that they're coming out with that when at the same time they gleefully accepted all the endorsements from Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and all that for Justin Trudeau. You remember when those were coming out in all the Trudeau elections? It seemed like they were gleefully accepting.
Yeah, I mean, Barack Obama during his presidency interfered in a lot of elections, not just in Canada, but also in the United Kingdom. Famously, he was on the same side as Mark Carney during the Brexit referendum, where they both basically endorsed the European Union campaign.
Well,
So you know, Barack Obama's had his fingers, he's got his hands dirty a number of times in that regard.
and speaking of endorsements, we're going to play another endorsement for you. And this is from former Canadian, now U.S. citizen, Mike Myers.
This is what I can't stand in the world. And we're the country that stands up to bullies.
Yeah.
And I hope, and I know that you will, but I hope we continue to be the good guys.
What does Canada mean to you? Like, how does it?
Canada means everything. I wouldn't be anything without Canada. The Canadian taxpayers subsidized our housing, gave me a fantastic high school. They had a television studio.
You get that education.
Yeah.
You get that perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talented, but you get the opportunity to express that talent. I mean, you are talented.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's very kind. No, I got to
I mean,
work
I
at
think
this.
you're gonna do big things.
I hope so. Thank you. That's very nice. No, but I worked at the CBC. In fact, I
didn't know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I did.
Do you think we should get rid of the CBC?
No,
Because there's a guy who
should
says
keep
we
the
should just get rid of
CBC.
the CBC. Okay,
That
let's
guy's
keep-
wrong.
He's wrong.
No.
But this thing about still being Canadian and
Yeah.
always being Canadian, and it's about values. It's about an attitude. You know, the attachment to this country that gave you these opportunities, gave me tremendous opportunities.
Right.
Obviously.
Going anywhere in the world and people find out you're Canadian, you're the good guy.
Yeah. And sometimes you got to get those elbows up.
Yeah.
But only for as long as
They
it is
just-
necessary, and then you
They
go
just-
back.
I've always said that nobody should confuse Canadians' kindness with weakness.
Yeah.
There you go. And that's how you pay Canada. You got everything from Canada, and then you move to the South and pay your taxes to the Americans.
Well, the other one was, what does Canada mean to you? Canada means everything to me, except I left about 40 years ago and I'm not coming back. So it doesn't really mean everything to you, does it?
Both of
But
them.
I think the real hint, the real explanation there as to what is his motivation. I mean, I'm going to be quite cheeky here, Mr. Myers. I hope you'll forgive me in sort of trying to guess what you think. But it seems to me that it's to do with what he said at the end there, where he said, you know, everywhere you go, people recognize you as Canadian and that you're the good guys. I feel like maybe that's it. It's like it's an identity thing for Mike Myers, and it's that thing where you see people with the maple leaf stitched into their backpacks and stuff like that. And it's like they just want to sort of be recognized as good, and Canada's just good in a very vague way. There's no real like solidity to it. It's just Canada's just good, right? Usually contrasted with America, or almost always contrasted with America. And I just feel like that's what he's on about here. That's what Shrek, aka Austin Powers, is on about here. He wants to be the good guy in the American context, but it's not. That's really not. I just don't know what to make of that endorsement. I don't know what the average Canadian would make of that endorsement, because it doesn't really have very much to do with the reality of day-to-day life in this country. And Mike
Yeah.
Myers doesn't really know anything about that, unfortunately.
And for somebody that says Canada has given him everything, both of them, they both say that Canada's given him everything, and they both left and took their everything somewhere else. And
Exactly. Yeah.
so
I mean,
they-
Mark Carney, lest we forget, Mark Carney was out of Canada at the age of 18, wasn't he? Straight off to Harvard University. Then he went to England. Then he went to Japan, the US, then England again. You know, he's like, it's good that he has ambition or whatever. Yeah, it's great for his personal life, but it's a little bit cheeky for him to then say that he's like Mr. Canada. You know, it doesn't really work like that, does it?
yeah, it's a bit, and you and I talked about this because you know when Kamala Harris was using these famous people for endorsements, and we talked about how Oprah got paid $2 million, or Harpo Productions got paid $2 million to endorse Kamala Harris. There's a thing floating around the internet that says Mike Myers was paid as well. I haven't seen like confirmation of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, he doesn't need the money, but then nor did Oprah. So that baffled me, that situation with Oprah, because she's actually a billionaire, isn't she? So that was just madness. But I guess the productions cost money, and I guess she didn't want to fork out, go into her own treasury to pay for that.
I mean, I did see an invoice that showed from Katie Telford that there was a payment, but again, with AI these days, you never know if that's true or not. So again, you have to wait for. I'm sure it'll come out eventually if it's true.
I don't know why Katie Telford would advertise that, though, to be honest.
But the other side of that is like it comes across as very inauthentic. You have two former Canadians talking about how Canada gave them everything, and yet they took their gains from Canada and spent their energy and their livelihoods and money elsewhere. And Carney still took the company and moved its headquarters, like, while he was, running for the Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah, I think they would object to you referring to them as former Canadians, though. That's a hard one to sort of label somebody with, isn't it? But I guess
we'll
exiles, you could say.
We'll put an asterisk beside it. How's that?
An asterisk, and then say, we don't want to offend you.
And with lots of footnotes, right? I think, Mark Carney has identified as when asked in a conference, he says, you have 3 passports, what do you identify as? And he says, I identify, and these are his words, I identify as a European. Those are his words, not mine. And also in an interview he did recently, while he was running for the leadership race of the Liberals, they asked him again what he is, and he said he is a global elitist, and that's what Canada needs right now, is a global elitist. I don't know if many people.
Yeah, and then you got Mickey Myers there, who I know this from my benighted former homeland of England. He is quite an Anglophile, and he pops over to promote his latest Shrek film or whatever the hell it is. And he often, when he speaks to a British reporter, he often talks about his kind of like British identity, because both of his parents were from Liverpool. The beat.
So there you go. So there you go. Both of them can just go anywhere they want and speak to the people and say what people want to hear, right? So when you're in Canada, you speak like you wrap the flag around yourself, which, I mean, they've done a really good job wrapping the flag. They put the flag over their heads there. They wrap the jerseys around themselves, and they talk about Canada first. And if you ask yourself, have the Liberals put Canada first? And this is to the viewers. Have the Liberals put Canada first in the past 10 years? Answer that question yourselves. And
well, we're about to, aren't we? We're all about to answer that question when we cast our ballots. But I wonder if Mike Myers is going to cast a vote. Can he even do that as a non-resident?
Well, he's not paying his taxes here, that's for sure. Because he went to the land of low taxes.
That's the thing. Like, you know, he had all of these advantages there. He's talking about how he had subsidized housing, a good high school, television studio, whatever the hell that means. He's talking about all this and how great it is. But it clearly was not good enough, was it? It wasn't good enough for his
And,
talents. He
and there's a
didn't
lot.
think that. That's why he went somewhere else.
And there's a deception in there too that will point out before we move on. The deception is Carney says that the other guy wants to get rid of the CBC. That is not true.
Yeah. Well, all is fair in love and politics, we might as well say. And there's lots of things that he's said. I mean, they're also accusing Polyev of this master plan to cut every single benefit in the world. And yeah, Polyev just now, I watched him in the Toronto area, just said we're going to make sure that none of that happens. So, but you know, this is what happens in politics, isn't it? It's a kind of back and forth, and you just have to choose which one you believe.
That's what we keep saying to people is make sure you vet where you're getting your information from and understand if there's a benefit to what they're saying and who's going to benefit from it. There you go. Moving on to markets. So gold, our friend gold, hanging on to that $3,000 mark there. Look at that. 43.26 in Canadian dollars. Like, so if you have that in Canadian dollars, you're laughing. 43.26.
Yeah, if Canada had any gold left, we would be laughing about that, wouldn't we?
Central
Instead,
bankers
we'd have to cry.
Central bankers in Canada decided, which Mark Carney is one of them, that Canada does not need to hold gold reserves because it was an antiquated asset.
Yeah. Well, that's genuinely what people believed, isn't it? Like that was considered to be like very, very high level wisdom, wasn't it? At one point, it was like, no, that's from like the Roman times or the medieval times. Like, don't be stupid. Like everybody now has faith in fiat currency. Alas, they were wrong.
Yeah. Many nations still own gold, including the Americans, the English, the Russians, the Chinese.
Chinese have got quite a lot of it, haven't they? And certainly the Russians.
So I just asked our friend here, ChatGPT, Canada sold its gold reserves between the 1980s and 2000s, with the remaining ounces sold off in 2016. So there you go. In 1980, Canada had 1,000 tons of gold. And then Paul Martin and Jim Flaherty sold off the rest. And, you know, don't forget that Mark Carney took a lot of claim for Flaherty and Martin, I think, too, right? And in 2016, it said that they have become the only G7 nation. Hey, there's another thing they could stand out for, Chrystia Freeland can say. Canada is the only G7 nation to have 0 official gold holdings.
Just so advanced. So sophisticated and intelligent and advanced that we don't believe in that silly metal when we have our glorious loonie.
And then you just put the chart next to it, and then you'll see that didn't really work out for them. And why did Canada sell its gold? Its gold's had low returns compared to other instruments, it said, and the government wanted to diversify, preferred holding foreign currencies. Like they even sell bonds in US dollars. Like that shows a lot of faith in the Canadian dollar, right?
Yeah, and I mean, talking about the US dollar, it's being challenged quite a lot. You know, it wouldn't be a completely outlandish thing to sort of expect that the US dollar's dominance will fade in this century. Then what's going to replace it? I mean, it might well be gold or something like that, you know, so.
Yeah, and it said Mark Carney joined the Department of Finance in 2004 and served as deputy governor and then governor of Bank of Canada from 2008 to 2013. So he was there when we were peeling off the gold. And again, it does not look good now. Many central banks have been buying gold over the past like 10 years. And well,
yeah, well, it's the ultimate safe asset, isn't it, really? And we're not living in particularly safe times, so it makes perfect sense.
And then our friend Bitcoin starting to look like it wants to challenge that $100,000 mark again in US dollars and Canadian dollars. It's way over that, right? Let's do that in Canadian dollars just for, and again, remember when Pierre Poilievre was promoting Bitcoin, Justin Trudeau made fun of Bitcoin and ridiculed any investment in Bitcoin. So there you go. So in Canadian dollars, the Bitcoin, $125,567.
Yeah, we could have had a sovereign wealth fund in Bitcoin, couldn't we? That would have been nice.
So here you go. Like the Canadian Bank of Canada doesn't like gold or Bitcoin or the Liberals, but they do like to sell Canadian bonds denominated in U.S. dollars.
Yep, easy way to well, easier way to attract investors, isn't it? I mean, you'd think, especially at a time like this, people are they're really flocking to the dollar, aren't they, and to US treasuries. So, yeah.
And then here's our U.S. Canadian to U.S. dollar chart. Again, it's looking for some direction, still below the 70-cent mark. They're hanging on there. I think it's really looking for who's going to win this election, and that'll be the big thing. If we get a resource-based, I'll move out of the way, a resource-based government that's friendly to resources, we should see a sharp rebound in the Canadian dollar. If not, according to some of the banks in Canada, we could see it plumb to the levels in the low 60s, even bang on the door in the 50-cent range. And you want to talk about inflation?
Well, right now, it looks like a misfired rocket, doesn't it? So I guess it needs to decide, is it going to be a successful firework and go up and explode, or is it gonna sink down and crash into the ground?
And remind people that in the Harper government, we were actually above the American dollar. We were at $1.10 for a short period of time. So there you go.
The glory days there.
And we always say, never know what's going to happen, right? Because the old saying is when pigs fly. And here you go, AI. I'm going to play this clip here. Again, proving anything can happen. That's good, right? When pigs fly, and the pigs are flying, okay?
So what does that mean then? Anything can happen. I mean, what should we expect?
Anything can happen. Again, there you go. Anything can happen. You never know. And I guess the thing to do is just keep an open mind. Really use your common sense in this next little while, the next 28 days or whatever, the month of April, is you really need to filter and try to have some compassion and understanding for even people that, may be a little crazy. Right?
Yeah, there's a lot of those people out there.
It seems to be the flavor of the day is to hate on Tesla, and like a lot of Canadian governments are like taking away the EV credits for Tesla. Again, the best-selling EV in the world, and for reasons why. But like the virtue signaling knows no bounds in Canada, so they just like one after another, no different than COVID, when they seem to come out. And Chrystia Freeland said it best on, I think it was on a Jon Stewart show, that Canada, under Justin Trudeau, spent the last 10 years virtue signaling and identity politics. And the virtue signaling continues here. And there you go. But Tesla's officially launching in Saudi Arabia and many other markets. So will Canada really matter to Tesla at all? Because it's launching in India as well. So I think the only person this hurts, all this virtue signaling, is the Canadian consumer, not Tesla.
Oh, the only thing it hurts, you could say, is our environment, the world's CO2 levels, because we found that, I believe, actually, you said Tesla's the best-selling one. I think, isn't it today they came out, BYD topped them today, I think, for 2024?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, either the next big boy or the sort of equal to Tesla is BYD, the Chinese manufacturer. And we can't get them in Canada because of 100% tariff. And now we increasingly we can get Teslas, but it's becoming harder and harder, fewer incentives. They're already very expensive in Canada anyway, which puts a lot of people off. So it's kind of like, what are we going to do? Are we going to, I think Honda are going to bring out an SUV, an electric SUV, but it's like, there aren't really that many around, are there? Like, these are the two these dominate the market, and they're kind of being pushed out of Canada.
I think you're missing the main point. Basically the second in command right now, Stephen Guilbeault, who was the environment minister, as environment minister, he said Canada will not invest in any more roads. So you remember that? He said we'll not be building any more roads in Canada. You know, the second largest landmass in the world, because you don't need a car. As Chrystia Freeland said, she doesn't need a car. She has a chauffeur-driven limousine. Don't you have one?
Maybe Guilbeault is secretly the scientist from Back to the Future, and he's invented a flying DeLorean. So where we're going under the Liberal government, we don't need roads.
Don't you find that odd though? Like Guilbeault, they say the carbon tax is, some people say it's the failed policy that's actually ruined the Canadian economy for the past 10 years. And Guilbeault was, I guess, the poster boy for that policy. And instead of getting like kicked out of cabinet, he basically got a promotion to like second in command.
Yeah. And then there was a sort of famous moment in Parliament where Mark Holland, the health minister, who's also stepping down, or maybe he's going to change his mind too, I don't know. But he came out and he sort of, he like berated Pierre Poilievre because he'd gone on a drive in a Winnebago or something, hadn't he? Because he'd released a video where he'd driven to like
can't go on holidays. Yeah, no holidays.
Yeah, but he was so passionate about it. He's like, "Well, you're out there driving a car across the country." It's like, yeah, like most Canadians do that at some point. What are you getting at?
Yeah, I mean, and if we don't drop the EV mandate here in Canada, I mean, you and I have said this many, many times, if we don't drop the EV mandate in Canada, the tariffs won't matter on auto manufacturers because there will be no auto manufacturers left in Canada. They will all go to the US because the US has already dropped the EV mandates, and that you can almost take that one to the bank. So unless you want to be, unless maybe the Flintstones is going to come back and you're going to use your feet to power your car, maybe. And maybe that's how you're going to make your car go because it died on the side of the road, right?
Yeah,
that
I did
right?
have to push it. So I did do the Flintstone thing with the assistance of a cop.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. You should have pushed it into traffic so you could be done with it.
I don't think the officer would approve of that, but I could have just claimed that I fell, I guess.
Anyway, and then this one piece from Tesla here, the car had brains, and then this is one of the things that Teslas are even better than BYDs on. They are robots on wheels. So there you go. Robots on wheels. And in the meantime, well, we won't need any robots on wheels because you won't have any roads to drive on.
I mean, can you imagine if we do end up in a kind of in a situation of road poverty in Canada, and then the Americans and everybody else have got these like cyber taxis and things, robo taxis, whatever, and everyone's like living the dream, reclining in the back of their own chauffeur-driven car, and we're just sat here doing the Flintstones thing. That wouldn't be very good, would it?
And Brett brings up a good point, and one that we've talked about on the show. If you look at the supercharger network on a map, it's all lit up in most of the United States, and just the thin sliver down on the bottom of Canada there. Canada, like the most of Canada, like we talk about landmass, is not really ready for EVs, right? And the other thing about it is Canada being the second largest landmass in the world, we transport our goods across this great nation in diesel semis, and then trains that burn diesel, and tractors that are in the field that burn diesel. And it's all about the diesel, and that had the highest carbon tax, and that's what drove inflation, a compounding carbon tax on the transporting of our goods across this great nation. Nobody really looked at common sense and said, wow, that takes a lot of diesel to transport those goods across the nation. There's no electric alternative for those ways to transport our goods. And including, let's not remember, the super ships or super tankers or whatever, all the ships, guess what they burn?
Mm-hmm.
Diesel.
It's not biofuel, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's surely not nuclear. Anyway, because they couldn't come into a Vancouver harbor if that was the case.
That's true. Yeah, they wouldn't be able to survive then, would they? In BC, if that happened.
Maybe that's why the Canadian military does not have nuclear warships, because they couldn't come into a Canadian harbor. Sorry, the Vancouver
It would upset
harbor.
the Green Party very much, and we don't want to do that.
Stephen Guilbeault would probably leave his role as environment minister so he could repel from something. Remember his orange jumpsuit?
He would probably leave Canada, wouldn't he, and go and live in some sort of village in Peru.
Let's get to the fun part of the show. Our friends at Babylon Bee here, a couple of good ones. Passenger, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. No, not that one. You got to go back a couple there, Rommel. One more, back one more. Oh, did you not get that one, Rommel? Maybe we'll come back to that one and see you scramble and get that one because that was a good one. Go to the other one. There you go. Bernie Sanders in trouble as paid rally attendings vote to unionize. I guess they got a big turnout there, and then people are making fun of that. And then he was on an interview show with a Democrat-leaning show, and they asked him about AOC, and he was about to storm off. He got up to leave, and he didn't want to answer any questions. So the Democrats and liberals.
He's a bit prickly, isn't he, Bernie? He gets upset. I saw him even when he did that interview with what's his name, Joe Rogan. He seemed a little like, and Joe Rogan was very fawning. Like Joe Rogan, big fan of Bernie Sanders at the time. Anyway, I don't know if he still is, but Bernie Sanders just seemed, I don't know, a little bit irritable. Like he's a bit grouchy, isn't he, in his own way? I guess that's like part of his appeal, maybe.
And then Elon Musk is getting all that grief. They're burning down Tesla cars and trying to, do all those things. They found a bomb actually at one of the Tesla dealerships, and he's actually going to disguise the IRS building as a Tesla dealership, so the Democrats will burn it down.
Isn't that just like the perfect architectural decision for the IRS? That just looks like like a North Korean prison or something.
It does. Did you get that other one in there, Rommel? You managed to get it? You did? Yes? No? Maybe so? No, not going to happen. Maybe we'll do it tomorrow because it was a funny one. No fun from Rommel today. There you go. So we'll have to get it another day. So any closing words there, Ian, before we close off the day?
Just, let's buckle up and get ready for more of these promises and more of these, dare we call them falsehoods, being exchanged between our beloved political leaders.
Well, we're going to try and get some answers selfishly for ourselves on Bill C-18, see if anybody will address it. I doubt if they will. They don't like to address anything that they can't act like Candyman for, right? So the Candyman can, that should be the theme song. Lots of promises and then delivery. I was actually at a meeting last night with a bunch of people in the 70-plus range, and they were talking about empty promises. They were talking about the $250 that never got delivered by the Liberals, and the $1,000 that never got delivered by the NDP, and the rent credit never delivered by the former NDP party. And so there you go.
That demographic, though, is very interesting and is actually that's a demographic to watch because they seem to have shifted over to the Trudeau Liberals in huge numbers. So it'll be interesting to see if Carney can keep them. It looks like so far that he is. And obviously that's a really, really important demographic that tends to kind of swing elections.
Well, the ones I talked to last night were a definite no, but again, it is definitely, I think the young people are going to be the ones that really are going to, if they show up to vote, is definitely leaning, and across the world are leaning towards more Republicans or conservative votes.
Yeah, hugely, especially men as well.
They've been disenfranchised in so many different ways, and it's just been so tough for young people. So there you go. That's our show for today. I am doing a show on Renee's show. We're supposed to do it at noon today. It's been put off till tomorrow, Wednesday. And we're going to focus a lot more on election coverage. It's going to be a busy run until April 28th. And we'll be here all night long, too, for Decision Day for Election Canada 2025. We will be here for you and trying to give you something that is less, well, we don't get paid to say what we're to say, unless somebody wants to send us a big fat check, eh?
And then we'll say whatever you want. Whatever you want.
Yeah, if you can match 1.44 billion, we'll sell our souls. There you go.
Literally anything you want. If you want this to become a Buddhist show, we could do that. It's fine. We're open to that.
we're open to that. Yeah, for 1.44 billion. We'll even beat that show and yeah. Well, we'll leave it there. I was going to say something, but anyway, we'll leave it there. We'll leave it there. All right. We thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.